The evening of October 17, 1997 was unseasonably warm for autumn in northern Nevada. The kind of night where windows stayed open despite the calendar's insistence that winter approached. In the small town of Elkhorn Ridge, population 2,347, the Friday night high school football game had just ended, and families were making their way home under a canopy of stars so clear they seemed to pierce the darkness rather than illuminate it. Among those driving home that night were Thomas Reeves, 42, and his son Andrew, 16. They had attended the game together, as they did most Fridays in the fall. The Elkhorn Wolves had won 21-14 against their rivals from Pinecrest, and the mood in town was celebratory. Thomas and Andrew were seen leaving the stadium parking lot at approximately 9:45 p.m. in their green 1994 Ford Explorer. They never arrived home. Grace Reeves, Thomas's wife and Andrew's mother, wasn't initially concerned when they didn't return by 10:30 p.m. She assumed they had stopped for food at Miner's Diner, a local establishment that often stayed open late after games. When midnight came and went without word, Grace began calling friends and neighbors. By 2 a.m. she had contacted the Elkhorn Ridge Police Department to report her husband and son missing. The initial response was standard, explained retired Sheriff Dale Patterson in a 2020 interview. We had 2 males who were 4 hours overdue. In a small town like ours, that usually meant they ran into friends, lost track of time. We took the report, but we weren't sounding alarms yet. That changed when Thomas's Ford Explorer was discovered the following morning, October 18, at the bottom of a 30-foot ravine off Mountain Pass Road, a winding route that connected Elkhorn Ridge to the highway. The vehicle had suffered extensive damage consistent with a high-speed impact and subsequent rollover. The driver's side airbag had deployed. The passenger's side had not. What transformed this accident into one of Nevada's most perplexing unsolved cases was simple. Despite blood evidence in the vehicle, there were no bodies. Thomas and Andrew Reeves had vanished. The investigation began immediately, with local police and state troopers combing the area around the crash site. Tracking dogs were brought in, picking up scents that led away from the vehicle before losing them approximately 200 yards from the ravine. The blood in the vehicle, later confirmed to belong to both Thomas and Andrew, suggested injuries but not necessarily fatal ones. What we had was bizarre, Patterson continued. The crash was severe enough to cause significant bleeding, yet both occupants had apparently walked away, or been removed. This second possibility, that Thomas and Andrew had been taken from the scene, was considered when investigators noted unusual marks on the ground near the vehicle. Drag patterns in the dirt suggested that at least one person had been pulled or had crawled away from the Explorer. But the patterns stopped abruptly, as though whoever had made them had suddenly been lifted. The initial theory was straightforward. Injured in the crash, Thomas and Andrew had sought help. Perhaps they had been picked up by a passing motorist who had transported them to a hospital. Calls to every medical facility within a 100-mile radius yielded nothing. No patients matching their descriptions had been admitted that night or the following morning. As days turned into weeks, the search expanded. The FBI became involved on October 25, bringing additional resources and expertise. Agents interviewed everyone who had attended the football game, reconstructed Thomas and Andrew's movements that evening, and analyzed the crash site in greater detail. What they found raised more questions than answers. The crash itself was puzzling. Accident reconstructionists determined that the Explorer had left the road at a point where the guardrail was intact. There were no skid marks indicating that Thomas had tried to brake, and the vehicle had gone over the edge at an angle that suggested a deliberate action, rather than a loss of control. It wasn't consistent with falling asleep at the wheel, or swerving to avoid an animal, FBI Special Agent Laurel Bennett noted in her report. The trajectory suggested that the driver had steered directly off the road. This led investigators to consider several possibilities. A medical emergency that had incapacitated Thomas, a mechanical failure of the vehicle, or the most troubling scenario that Thomas had deliberately driven off the edge in a suicide attempt, taking his son with him. Grace Reeves vehemently rejected this last theory. Thomas was not suicidal. she told investigators. He had just received a promotion at work. We were planning a trip to Hawaii for our anniversary. Andrew had just been accepted to a summer program at Stanford. They were both happy, making plans for the future. Background checks supported Grace's assessment. Thomas was a civil engineer with the State Transportation Department, respected in the community and financially secure. Andrew was a junior at Elkhorn Ridge High School, a strong student with particular talents in mathematics and computer science. Neither had shown signs of depression or unusual behavior in the days leading up to their disappearance. The investigation took a turn when Thomas's colleague, Patrick Donovan, came forward with information about a project Thomas had been working on. Thomas had been conducting structural assessments of bridges and tunnels throughout the county, documenting potential safety issues. According to Donovan, Thomas had discovered concerning deficiencies in the construction of the recently completed Carson River Bridge, deficiencies that had been deliberately concealed in official report. Tom was troubled by what he found, Donovan told the FBI. He had gathered evidence and was planning to present it to the State Oversight Committee the following week. He told me he had documentation that would blow the lid off the whole operation. This revelation shifted the focus of the investigation. Was it possible that Thomas and Andrew had not been victims of an accident, but of something more sinister? Had Thomas's professional discoveries made him a target? The Carson River Bridge project had been awarded to Westlake Construction, a company owned by Howard Westlake, one of the most influential businessmen in the county. The $37 million 0-cents contract had been the largest in the company's history, and any suggestion of corner-cutting or fraud would have serious financial and legal repercussions. When questioned, Westlake denied any impropriety in the bridge construction and expressed shock at the suggestion that his company might be connected to the Reeves disappearance. "This is absurd," he was quoted as saying. "Westlake Construction has been in business for 30 years. We don't silence whistleblowers. We certainly don't harm children." Nevertheless, the FBI obtained warrants to search Westlake's offices and the homes of several key employees. They discovered financial records indicating that the company had been experiencing significant cash flow problems prior to securing the bridge contract. There was also evidence that certain inspection reports had been altered, though it was unclear who had made the changes. Most significantly, they found a series of emails between Howard Westlake and County Commissioner Franklin Vega discussing Thomas Reeves. In one, dated October 12, 1997, 5 days before the disappearance, Westlake had written, "Reeves is becoming a problem. We need to handle this before the committee meeting." Vega had replied, "I will speak with him. Everyone has a pressure point." When confronted with these emails, both Westlake and Vega claimed they had been referring to legitimate business concerns. Their handling of the situation, they insisted, had involved plans to offer Thomas a consulting position that would address his safety concerns while bringing him into the fold. "It was a carrot, not a stick," Vega explained. "We valued Thomas's expertise and wanted to work with him, not against him." The FBI remained skeptical but lacked evidence directly connecting either man to the disappearance. Both had alibis for the night of October 17. Westlake had been at a charity gala in Reno until midnight, while Vega had been at home with his wife and teenage daughter. As the investigation continued, agents began examining Thomas and Andrew's personal lives more closely. They discovered that Andrew had recently broken up with his girlfriend, Natalie Parker, after a 2-year relationship. The breakup had been Natalie's decision and, according to friends, Andrew had taken it hard. "He was devastated," recalled Elliot Turner, Andrew's best friend. "He tried to hide it, but you could tell he was hurting. He kept trying to talk to her, to change her mind, but she had moved on. She was already seeing someone else." That someone else was Jason Winters, a senior and the quarterback of the Elkhorn Wolves. Jason had been the star of the game on the night Thomas and Andrew disappeared. "It wasn't really a fight," said Megan Holmes, a classmate who had observed the incident. "More like Andrew yelling and Jason brushing him off. Mr. Reeves pulled Andrew away pretty quickly. They left right after that." This new information complicated the timeline. If Thomas and Andrew had left immediately after the confrontation with Jason, They should have arrived home well before the crash was estimated to have occurred. The site of the accident was only a 10-minute drive from the school, yet forensic evidence suggested the crash had happened close to 11 p.m., more than an hour after they were seen leaving the parking lot. Where had they gone during that missing hour? And what had happened on Mountain Pass Road that had sent their vehicle plunging into the ravine? The investigation stalled as winter descended on Elkhorn Ridge. The first snow fell on November 12, covering potential evidence and making further searches of the rugged terrain impossible until spring. The FBI maintained a presence in town, continuing to interview residents and follow up on leads. But no significant breakthroughs emerged. Grace Reeves refused to give up hope. She organized community searches whenever weather permitted, distributed flyers throughout the state, and established a reward fund for information leading to Thomas and Andrew's whereabouts. She appeared on national television programs dedicated to missing persons, holding up family photos and pleading for anyone with information to come forward. "Someone knows something," she said during one such appearance. "Someone saw something that night, or heard something since. Please, if you are watching this, help me find my family." Spring arrived, and with it a renewed search effort. The melting snow revealed new areas to explore, and volunteer teams meticulously covered the mountains surrounding Elkhorn Ridge. Their dedication paid off on April 7, 1998, when a search dog alerted to an area approximately 3 miles from the crash site. What they found was Andrew's wallet, containing his student ID and $43 in cash. The wallet was partially buried under a fallen log, in a location that searchers had passed dozens of times during the initial investigation. Its condition suggested it had been there throughout the winter. More disturbing was what the forensic team discovered when they processed the wallet: traces of blood that did not belong to Andrew. The DNA profile extracted from these traces did not match Thomas or any other known individual in the case. It represented a new, unidentified person who had somehow been involved in the events of October 17. This discovery energized the investigation. If someone else had been present, someone whose blood had mingled with Andrew's possessions, then the accident theory became less plausible. The FBI began reviewing all of the physical evidence collected from the crash site, searching for any similar unknown DNA profiles. They found a match on the exterior door handle of the Explorer's rear passenger side. The same unknown individual had touched the vehicle at some point before or after the crash. This evidence strongly suggested a third party had been present at the scene, though their role remained unclear. Was this person a good Samaritan who had stopped to help? A witness who had chosen not to come forward? Or someone with more sinister involvement in the disappearance? The FBI released a public statement requesting that anyone who had been on Mountain Pass Road the night of October 17 contact them, even if they believed their information to be insignificant. They emphasized that they were not looking to assign blame, but simply to gather all possible data about the incident. This appeal yielded an unexpected response. On April 23, 1998, a man named Vincent Torres contacted the FBI field office in Reno. Torres identified himself as a long-haul truck driver who had been passing through Elkhorn Ridge the night of the disappearance. He claimed to have witnessed something on Mountain Pass Road, but had not come forward earlier because of his own legal troubles. He had been driving with a suspended license and had outstanding warrants in California. "I saw the green SUV," Torres told agents. "It was parked on the shoulder, hazard lights flashing. There was another vehicle behind it, a dark-colored pickup truck. I saw 2 men standing by the SUV and what looked like someone sitting in the passenger seat. I didn't stop because, I couldn't risk getting pulled over. But I remember thinking it was a weird place to pull over, right on that curve with the drop-off." Torres's account placed the vehicles on the road approximately 30 minutes before the estimated time of the crash. If accurate, his statement suggested that Thomas had stopped voluntarily and had been engaged in some interaction with the occupants of the pickup truck. This raised the possibility that whatever had happened to Thomas and Andrew had begun before the vehicle went into the ravine. The FBI attempted to corroborate Torres' story by checking traffic cameras in the area, but in 1997, Such technology had not yet been installed on the rural roads around Elkhorn Ridge. They did, however, find partial confirmation from a gas station attendant in the neighboring town of Millerville, who recalled seeing a green Ford Explorer followed closely by a dark pickup truck passing through around 10:30 p.m. that Friday. The investigation now focused on identifying the pickup truck and its occupants. A review of vehicle registrations in the county revealed 17 dark pickup trucks that matched the general description. Of these, 5 belonged to individuals or businesses connected to Westlake Construction. One in particular drew the FBI's attention: a black 1996 Ford F-150, registered to Robert Flynn, Westlake Construction's head of security. Flynn, a former police officer who had left the force under a cloud of misconduct allegations, had worked for Howard Westlake for nearly a decade. When agents attempted to locate Flynn for questioning, they discovered he had left town 3 days after Thomas and Andrew's disappearance. According to his ex-wife, Flynn had called her on October 20, 1997, saying he had been offered a job in Alaska and would be leaving immediately. He had not returned to Elkhorn Ridge since. This suspicious timing, combined with Flynn's connection to Westlake, made him a person of interest in the case. The FBI issued a bulletin for law enforcement agencies nationwide to be on the lookout for Flynn, but he seemed to have vanished as completely as the Reeves. The investigation continued through the summer of 1998, with agents pursuing leads across multiple states. They discovered that Flynn had never arrived in Alaska. The company that had supposedly hired him had no record of his application or employment. His last confirmed location was a motel in Idaho, where he had stayed for 2 nights before checking out on October 23, 1997. Meanwhile, pressure mounted on Howard Westlake and Commissioner Vega. The FBI's investigation had uncovered evidence of numerous irregularities in county construction contracts, leading to a broader probe of corruption within the local government. While not directly related to the Reeves case, these discoveries cast the 2 men in an increasingly shy light. Vega broke first. In August 1998, facing potential indictment on unrelated bribery charges, he approached the FBI with an offer: immunity in exchange for information about Westlake's business practices. When asked specifically about Thomas Reeves, Vega admitted that Westlake had been concerned about Thomas's inspection findings. Howard was worried about liability. Vega told agents the bridge had issues, nothing catastrophic, but enough that fixing them would eat into profits. Thomas was by the book, wouldn't look the other way. Howard wanted me to offer him a position on the county oversight committee, thinking it would create a conflict of interest that would force him to recuse himself from the bridge inspection. Vega insisted that neither he nor Westlake had intended any harm to come to Thomas or Andrew. It was business, he claimed. Dirty business maybe, but not violent. We are not killers. The FBI believed Vega was telling the truth, or at least what he believed to be the truth. But his statement didn't explain what had happened on Mountain Pass Road, or why Robert Flynn had fled town immediately afterward. A potential breakthrough came in November 1998, when a hunter discovered a backpack in a remote area of the Tuyabe National Forest, approximately 15 miles from Elkhorn Ridge. The backpack contained a laptop computer, later identified as belonging to Thomas Reeves, and a spiral notebook filled with handwritten notes and calculations. The laptop's battery had long since died, and exposure to the elements had damaged its internal components. FBI forensic technicians worked painstakingly to recover data from the hard drive, eventually succeeding in extracting numerous files related to Thomas's bridge inspections. Among these files were photographs documenting substandard materials, improper construction techniques, and falsified inspection reports for the Carson River Bridge. Thomas had compiled a comprehensive case against Westlake Construction, one that would likely have resulted in criminal charges had it been presented to the Oversight Committee. The notebook contained additional information not included in the digital files: names, dates, and amounts that appeared to document bribes paid to county officials. Commissioner Vega's name appeared multiple times, along with specific reference to RF as intermediary, almost certainly Robert Flynn. This evidence transformed the case from a missing persons investigation to a likely homicide motivated by Thomas's whistleblowing activities. With this new information, the FBI obtained arrest warrants for Howard Westlake and Robert Flynn on charges of conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Westlake was taken into custody at his office on December 3, 1998. He maintained his innocence, claiming no knowledge of any plot against Thomas Reeves, and expressing shock at the evidence of corruption within his company. "If these things happened," he told reporters as he was led to a waiting FBI vehicle, "they happened without my knowledge or approval." Flynn remained at large, his whereabouts unknown. The FBI added him to their 10 most wanted list, describing him as armed and dangerous. His photo appeared on post office walls and television programs across the country, but no confirmed sightings were reported. As 1998 drew to a close, the citizens of Elkhorn Ridge held a candlelight vigil for Thomas and Andrew Reeves. Grace Reeves stood surrounded by friends and neighbors, her face illuminated by the flickering light of hundreds of candles. "I still believe they are out there," she told the gathered crowd. "Until I have proof otherwise, I will never stop looking for my husband and my son." The new year brought new developments in the case, though not the resolution Grace had hoped for. In January 1999, a forest ranger discovered human remains in a shallow grave near the Oregon border, approximately 120 miles from Elkhorn Ridge. Dental records confirmed the identity as Robert Flynn. The condition of the remains indicated that Flynn had been dead for more than a year, likely since late October or early November 1997, shortly after his disappearance from Elkhorn Ridge. The cause of death was determined to be 2 gunshot wounds to the back of the head, execution style. This discovery complicated the investigation significantly. If Flynn had been involved in whatever had happened to Thomas and Andrew, who had then killed Flynn, was it a falling out among conspirators, or had someone else entirely entered the picture? Howard Westlake, now facing trial for fraud and corruption, denied any knowledge of Flynn's death. "This just proves what I have been saying all along," he insisted through his attorney. "I'm being framed. Someone is eliminating witnesses and planting evidence to make me look guilty." The FBI was skeptical of Westlake's claims, but could not ignore the possibility that a third party was involved. They began investigating Flynn's known associates, particularly those with connections to organized crime, a world Flynn had encountered during his time as a police officer. This line of inquiry led them to Michael Donato, a reputed enforcer for a crime family operating out of Las Vegas. Records showed that Flynn and Donato had been in communication in the weeks leading up to Thomas and Andrew's disappearance, with multiple calls between their phones. When agents attempted to locate Donato for questioning, they learned he had left the country on October 25, 1997, flying to Brazil on a one-ways ticket. Like Flynn, he had not returned to the United States. As the investigation entered its second year, the FBI's resources were gradually redirected to other cases. While the Reeves disappearance remained officially active, the number of agents assigned to it dwindled. The prevailing theory was that Thomas had uncovered corruption, been targeted because of it, and that he and Andrew had likely been killed the night of October 17, 1997. Their bodies, it was assumed, had been disposed of somewhere in the vast wilderness surrounding Elkhorn Ridge. Howard Westlake went to trial in September 1999 on multiple counts of fraud, bribery, and corruption. He was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. While never formally charged in connection with the Reeves case due to insufficient evidence, the judge cited the disappearance as an aggravating factor in sentencing. "This court cannot determine your role, if any, in what happened to Thomas and Andrew Reeves," the judge stated. "The evidence suggests that their fate was directly connected to Mr. Reeves' discovery of your criminal activities. That shadow hangs over these proceedings and cannot be ignored." Grace Reeves filed a wrongful death civil suit against Westlake and his company in 2000, resulting in a judgment of $12,700,000. The money remained in escrow, however, as Grace refused to have Thomas and Andrew declared legally dead. Accepting that money would mean accepting that they are gone, she explained. I'm not ready to do that. Years passed. Elkhorn Ridge gradually recovered from the tragedy that had shaken the small community, though the case remained a somber topic of conversation. The high school established a scholarship in Andrew's name, awarded annually to a student excelling in mathematics. The county renamed a section of Mountain Pass Road as Reeves Memorial Highway. Grace Reeves never left Elkhorn Ridge, never sold the family home. They need to be able to find their way back, she would say when friends suggested she might benefit from a fresh start elsewhere. She became involved in organizations supporting families of missing persons, using her experience to help others navigate similar nightmares. And then, in 2020, 23 years after Thomas and Andrew vanished, the case suddenly, unexpectedly, reopened. The catalyst was a routine training exercise by the FBI's evidence response team in the mountains near Elkhorn Ridge. New agents were being instructed in search techniques for rugged terrain, when one of them discovered a weathered piece of metal partially embedded in the trunk of a pine tree that had grown around it over the years. That metal fragment was identified as part of a license plate from a 1994 Ford Explorer, specifically Thomas Reeves' vehicle. This was perplexing, as the Explorer had been recovered from the ravine and had been in police impound since 1997. How had a piece of it ended up miles away, at an elevation significantly higher than the crash site? Forensic analysis revealed that the fragment had been torn from the vehicle with considerable force, consistent with an explosion rather than the impact of the crash. This led investigators to re-examine the Explorer itself, still in storage at a government facility. The Ford Explorer that had rested in government storage for over 2 decades held secrets that had gone undetected during the original investigation. Advanced forensic techniques unavailable in 1997 now revealed many traces of explosive residue in the undercarriage of the vehicle. The pattern suggested a small, professionally placed charge designed to disable the vehicle rather than destroy it completely. "We are looking at a sophisticated attack," explained FBI Special Agent Diana Reynolds, who headed the reopened investigation. The explosive was positioned to rupture the brake lines while the vehicle was in motion. It wouldn't necessarily cause a catastrophic crash, but on a winding mountain road with steep drop-offs it wouldn't need to. This discovery transformed the understanding of what had happened on Mountain Pass Road that October night. Thomas Reeves hadn't driven off the road due to fatigue, distraction, or suicidal intent. The crash wasn't an accident at all. It was an assassination attempt, disguised as one. The license plate fragment found in the tree added another layer to the puzzle. Its location, nearly 4 miles from the crash site, and at a significantly higher elevation, suggested it had been torn loose during a secondary incident. The FBI team conducted a thorough search of the surrounding area, using ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs. They found nothing at first. Then, on the 3rd day of the search, a dog alerted to a spot near a dry creek bed, approximately half a mile from where the license plate fragment had been discovered. Excavation revealed a rusted Colt .45 pistol, buried about 18 inches below the surface. Ballistics testing linked the weapon to an unsolved case, the execution-style murder of Robert Flynn, whose body had been found near the Oregon border in 1999. The gun had been fired twice, consistent with the 2 bullets recovered from Flynn's skull during his autopsy. "This is a significant connection," Reynolds noted. "We now have physical evidence linking the area where the license plate fragment was found to Flynn's murder. This suggests that whatever happened to Thomas and Andrew Reeves, Flynn was involved, and someone subsequently killed him, likely to eliminate him as a witness." The investigation intensified. The FBI revisited every aspect of the original case, re-interviewing surviving witnesses and applying new forensic methods to old evidence. They focused particularly on the missing hour between when Thomas and Andrew had left the football game and when the crash had occurred. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source: digitized records from a cellular tower that had been operating in the area in 1997. While primitive by modern standards, The tower had logged basic connection data from phones within its range. These records had been collected during the original investigation but never fully analyzed due to the technical limitations of the time. Modern data mining techniques applied to these records revealed that Thomas Reeves' cell phone had connected to the tower at 10:17 p.m., approximately half an hour after leaving the football game. The location data wasn't precise, but it placed the phone in the vicinity of Westlake Construction's equipment yard, several miles from the direct route between the school and the Reeves home. Thomas had no obvious reason to be at that location, Reynolds explained. This suggests he may have been following someone or was directed there for some purpose. Given what we now know about his whistleblowing activities, it's possible he was meeting a source, or perhaps documenting additional evidence of wrongdoing. The FBI obtained a warrant to search the equipment yard, which had been sold in 2005 following Westlake Construction's bankruptcy after Howard Westlake's conviction. The current owners, a landscaping company, had made minimal changes to the property, focusing their operations on the main building while leaving the back sections largely untouched. In a remote corner of the yard, beside the rusted shell of an abandoned excavator, technicians discovered traces of blood in the soil. DNA testing confirmed it belonged to Andrew Reeves. The pattern of blood spatter indicated a traumatic injury had occurred at that spot, though the amount wasn't consistent with a fatal wound. "We believe Andrew was injured here but not killed," Reynolds stated. "The blood evidence suggests a violent assault, possibly to subdue him, rather than an attempt on his life at this location." No traces of Thomas's blood were found at the site, raising questions about the sequence of events. Had father and son been separated? Had Thomas witnessed his son's assault? Or had he been subdued by other means? The investigation now focused on reconstructing the events of that night. The working theory was that Thomas had driven to the equipment yard, either voluntarily or under duress, with Andrew in the passenger seat. Something had happened there resulting in Andrew's injury. They had then left or been taken from the yard, eventually ending up on Mountain Pass Road, where the Explorer, its brake lines sabotaged, had plunged into the ravine. But what had happened after the crash? And where were Thomas and Andrew now? The most troubling aspect of the case remained the complete absence of bodies. If Thomas and Andrew had died in the crash or been killed afterward, their remains should have been found during the extensive searches conducted in the area. The fact that they hadn't suggested several possibilities. Either their bodies had been transported far from Elkhorn Ridge, they had been disposed of in a way that made distaste that nearly impossible, or most intriguing of all, they might still be alive. This last possibility, however remote, gave renewed hope to Grace Reeves, now in her 60s but still residing in the family home. "I have always believed they were out there somewhere," she told investigators. "Not a day has gone by that I haven't looked for them in the face of every stranger." The FBI approached the case with cautious optimism. If Thomas and Andrew had survived that night, where had they been for 23 years? And why had they never contacted Grace or the authorities? One theory emerged: witness protection. Given Thomas's evidence against Westlake Construction, and potentially others involved in the corruption scheme, he might have been placed in a federal protection program, with his identity and Andrew's completely changed. But official inquiries to the U.S. Marshals Service yielded no confirmation of such an arrangement. Another possibility was that Thomas and Andrew had gone into hiding on their own, perhaps fearing that those who had tried to kill them would try again, even if they cooperated with authorities. This scenario was supported by what investigators knew about Thomas's character: methodical, detail-oriented, and fiercely protective of his son. If Thomas believed the system couldn't protect them, he might have taken matters into his own hands, suggested Reynolds. With his engineering background and financial resources, he could have established new identities independently of any official program. The investigation took a new direction when agents discovered that Thomas had withdrawn $42,000, 0 cents, from a brokerage account 2 weeks before the disappearance. The transaction had been noted in the original case file but dismissed as irrelevant. Thomas had told Grace he was planning to purchase a boat, something the family had discussed for several months. No boat had ever been purchased, at least not under Thomas's name. The money had simply vanished, much like Thomas and Andrew themselves. This substantial cash withdrawal now appeared significant. It was enough to sustain two people for months while they established new lives, particularly in 1997 when digital footprints were less pervasive and fake identification was easier to obtain. The FBI began searching for men matching Thomas and Andrew's descriptions, who had appeared in towns within a reasonable distance of Elkhorn Ridge in late 1997 or early 1998. They focused on communities near the Canadian border, reasoning that leaving the country would have provided an additional layer of security. This approach yielded numerous potential matches, but no definitive leads, until agents reviewed hospital records in a small town in Idaho, approximately 300 miles from Elkhorn Ridge. In November 1997, a man identifying himself as Philip Warren had brought his teenage son, James, to the emergency room with a broken arm and facial lacerations. The injuries were attributed to a hiking accident. The attending physician had noted something unusual. While the son's injuries appeared consistent with a fall, he also had an older, partially healed wound on his forehead that didn't match the explanation given. When questioned, the father had become defensive and left the hospital abruptly after his son's arm was set, declining follow-up appointments. The physical descriptions of Philip and James Warren generally matched Thomas and Andrew Reeves, allowing for changes in hair color and style. More significantly, the nature of James's older injury was consistent with the blood evidence found at the Westlake equipment yard. We believe Thomas and Andrew survived the attempt on their lives, fled Elkhorn Ridge, and briefly surfaced in Idaho under assumed names. Reynolds explained. The question now is where they went from there. Records showed that Philip Warren had paid the hospital bill in cash and listed a local motel as his address. Agents located the motel, still in operation under the same management. The elderly owner remembered the Warrens vaguely, a quiet father and son who had stayed for nearly 3 weeks before departing without notice. They kept to themselves, the owner recalled. The boy's arm was in a cast. The father seemed nervous, always watching the parking lot through the window. I figured they were running from something, maybe domestic troubles, you know? But they were polite, paid on time, never caused problems. The Warrens had left no forwarding address and had taken all their belongings. The motel room had been cleaned before investigators could examine it for forensic evidence. Another dead end. Then, in June 2020, a breakthrough. Facial recognition software identified a man resembling an age-braced image of Thomas Reeves in the background of a news report about a wildfire in British Columbia, Canada. The footage, from 2015, showed emergency personnel and local residents evacuating a remote community called Pine Harbor. Among those helping to load supplies into trucks was a gray-typed man with Thomas's distinctive nose and jawline. He wore glasses and a full beard, both absent in his 1997 photos, but the AI system rated the match at 87%, high enough to warrant further investigation. Special Agent Reynolds traveled to Pine Harbor, a town of fewer than 1,000 residents on the eastern shore of Kootenay Lake. She discovered that a man calling himself Thomas Warren, not Philip, as in Idaho, had lived there from approximately 2001 to 2016. Working as a building inspector for the regional government, he was well respected. The town's mayor told Reynolds, kept mostly to himself, but always willing to help neighbors. Lived in a cabin about 3 miles outside of town. Had a son who'd visit during summers and holidays, a college student, I believe. Thomas Warren had left Pine Harbor shortly after the 2015 wildfire, telling neighbors he was retiring to Victoria on Vancouver Island. No one had heard from him since, though this wasn't considered unusual given his private nature. The cabin where Warren had lived showed signs of having been methodically cleaned before his departure. No fingerprints, no DNA, no personal items left behind. It was as if he had anticipated that someone might come looking for evidence of his identity. Reynolds obtained permission from Canadian authorities to interview Warren's former colleagues at the Regional Building Authority. They described him as exceptionally knowledgeable, particularly about structural engineering, but reluctant to socialize outside of work. He had never discussed his life before coming to Canada and deflected personal questions with good humor but firm boundaries. His son, who went by Jamie rather than James, had attended the University of British Columbia in Vancouver studying computer science. Like his father, he had been described as intelligent but reserved, with few close friends. The parallels to Thomas and Andrew Reeves are striking, Reynolds noted. Thomas was a civil engineer with expertise in structural assessment. Thomas Warren was a building inspector with similar knowledge. Andrew was mathematically gifted and interested in computers. Jamie Warren studied computer science. The ages align perfectly, accounting for the passage of time. Reynolds's investigation hit a wall, however, when she attempted to trace Thomas Warren's movements after 2016. No property records, utility accounts, or tax filings existed under that name in Victoria or elsewhere in Canada. It appeared that Warren had once again shed his identity and disappeared. Jamie Warren proved equally elusive. While records confirmed he had graduated from UBC in 2006, his subsequent employment history was spotty, with no consistent pattern. His last known position had been with a software company in Toronto in 2014, but he had resigned without explanation and vanished from official records. The trail had gone cold again. If Thomas and Andrew Reeves had indeed become Thomas and Jamie Warren, they had once more erased their footprints and moved on, perhaps adopting yet another set of identities. Meanwhile, the FBI continued investigating the circumstances of the original disappearance. Howard Westlake, now in the 20th year of his prison sentence, agreed to be interviewed about the case in exchange for consideration in his upcoming parole hearing. "I never ordered anyone to hurt Thomas Reeves," Westlake insisted. "Yes, he was a problem for the company. Yes, his whistleblowing would have cost us millions. But murder, that wasn't the solution." When presented with evidence of the explosive device on the Explorer and the blood found at his company's equipment yard, Flynn appeared genuinely shocked. "Flynn," he muttered. It had to be Flynn. He was always overzealous in handling problems. According to Westlake, Robert Flynn had operated with significant autonomy as head of security, often taking initiatives without explicit authorization. "I told him to gather information on Reeves, to find leverage we could use. I never said anything about harming him or his family." Westlake claimed he had been unaware of Flynn's actions until after Thomas and Andrew's disappearance. When he confronted Flynn, the security chief had been evasive, saying only that the problem had been handled and that Westlake should maintain deniability. "I suspected something bad had happened," Westlake admitted, "but by then it was too late. Flynn left town a few days later. I heard he was dead, killed by someone from his past. I always figured it was karma." When asked about Michael Donato, the organized crime associate who had been in contact with Flynn before the disappearance, Westlake's demeanor changed. "Donato was Flynn's connection, not mine. I knew Flynn had shady contacts from his police days, but I never wanted those people involved in my business." Westlake's statements, while self-serving, aligned with the evidence. The FBI's evolving theory was that Flynn, perhaps with Donato's assistance, had attempted to eliminate Thomas Reeves to prevent his whistleblowing. The plan had involved forcing Thomas to drive to the equipment yard, where Andrew had been assaulted, possibly as leverage to coerce Thomas's cooperation. Something had gone wrong, however. Perhaps Thomas had fought back, or refused to be intimidated even with his son's safety at risk. Flynn had then sabotaged the Explorer and sent Thomas and Andrew on their way, expecting the brake failure to result in a fatal crash on Mountain Pass Road. When the crash didn't kill them, Flynn had tracked them to the scene, intending to finish the job. But again, something unexpected had happened. Thomas and Andrew had escaped, and Flynn had ended up dead months later, his body dumped near the Oregon border. This scenario still didn't explain all the evidence, particularly the license plate fragment found miles from the crash site. Had Thomas and Andrew fled into the mountains on foot after the crash? Had they encountered Flynn there and somehow gained the upper hand, resulting in his death? The investigation took another turn, when a former employee of Westlake Construction came forward with new information. Victor Ramirez had been a heavy equipment operator for the company in 1997 and had worked the night shift at the equipment yard on October 17. "I saw them bring in the father and son," Ramirez told investigators. "It was Flynn and another guy, bigger, with a tattoo on his neck. They had the kid bleeding, semi-conscious. The father was trying to help him, begging them to let him take his son to a hospital." According to Ramirez, Flynn had demanded that Thomas hand over the evidence, presumably the documentation of safety violations at the Carson River Bridge. Thomas had refused, saying the information was already in safe hands. Flynn got really angry, started hitting the father. Ramirez continued. The other guy, the one with the tattoo, he was calmer, kept saying they needed to stick to the plan. They put the father and son back in their truck, the Green Explorer, and drove off. Flynn was driving it. The tattoo guy followed in Flynn's pickup. Ramirez had not come forward in 1997 because he was an undocumented immigrant at the time and feared deportation. He had since become a legal resident and, having seen a news report about the reopened investigation, felt compelled to share what he knew. His description of the tattooed guy matched Michael Donato, confirming the suspected connection between Flynn and organized crime. More importantly, his account placed Flynn behind the wheel of the Explorer as it left the equipment yard, with Thomas and Andrew apparently still alive. This new information changed the timeline significantly. If Flynn had been driving the Explorer, with Thomas and Andrew as passengers, then who had Vincent Torres, the truck driver who had come forward in 1998, seen standing beside the vehicle on Mountain Pass Road? The FBI re-interviewed Torres, now living in Arizona. After reviewing his original statement, he clarified a crucial detail. The men he had seen standing by the Explorer had appeared to be arguing, while the other had stood with his hands raised, as if in surrender or placation. "I thought they were having car trouble," Torres explained. "Now I wonder if what I saw was the father trying to talk his way out of the situation." The revised theory now suggested that Flynn had driven Thomas and Andrew to the isolated spot on Mountain Pass Road, where something had prompted him to stop. Perhaps Thomas had attempted to overpower Flynn, or had tried to persuade him to abandon the plan. Whatever had occurred, it had ended with the Explorer going over the edge into the ravine, with or without Thomas and Andrew inside. The question of how the license plate fragment had ended up miles away remained unanswered, as did the ultimate fate of Thomas and Andrew. Had they somehow escaped after the crash, only to be hunted down later? Had they turned the tables on their would-be killers? Or had they died that night, their bodies hidden so effectively that 23 years of searching had failed to find them? In August 2020, as the reinvestigation approached its third month, Special Agent Reynolds received an unexpected email at her FBI account. The sender's address was a random string of characters from a service that specialized in anonymous communication. The message contained only a set of GPS coordinates and a date, October 19, 3 p.m. The coordinates corresponded to a location in Toyabe National Forest, approximately 20 miles from Elkhorn Ridge. The date was 2 days away. After consulting with her superiors, Reynolds arranged for a team to accompany her to the designated spot at the specified time. They arrived early, securing the area and establishing surveillance positions around a small clearing beside a stream. At precisely 3 p.m., a man emerged from the trees on the opposite side of the clearing. He appeared to be in his late 60s, with gray hair and a trim beard. He walked with a slight limp but moved purposefully, scanning the area with alert eyes. Reynolds stepped forward, identifying herself as FBI. The man nodded, unsurprised. "I have been watching the news," he said. "You reopened the case." "Are you Thomas Reeves?" Reynolds asked. The man smiled faintly. "I haven't used that name in a very long time, but yes, that's who I was." In the debriefing that followed, Thomas explained what had happened on October 17, 1997. Much of it aligned with the FBI's reconstructed timeline. He had been forced to drive to the Westlake equipment yard, where Andrew had been assaulted, Flynn and Donato had then taken control of the Explorer, with Thomas and Andrew as prisoners in the back seat. They were taking us somewhere to kill us, Thomas explained. I knew we wouldn't survive the night if we didn't do something. On Mountain Pass Road, Thomas had created a distraction by claiming to be ill, causing Flynn to pull over. In the ensuing struggle, Thomas had managed to grab Flynn's gun, but Donato had disarmed him. The Explorer had gone over the edge during the fight, with Andrew still inside. I thought I'd lost him, Thomas said, his voice breaking. I could hear the vehicle crashing down the ravine, and I knew Andrew was in it. Something snapped. I attacked Donald off with everything I had. In the struggle that followed, both Donato and Flynn had been injured. Thomas had reclaimed the gun and forced them to take him down to the crashed Explorer, where he had found Andrew alive but unconscious. They wanted me to leave him, to go with them to get rid of the evidence. I refused. I told them I was taking Andrew to a hospital. Flynn pulled another gun. He had a backup. He was going to shoot us both right there. What happened next had changed everything. Donato, apparently deciding that the situation had spiraled too far out of control, had shot Flynn in the head. He said it was bad business, Thomas recalled. Said killing a kid wasn't what he signed up for. He helped me get Andrew out of the wreck, told me to disappear, to never come back to Nevada. He said he'd handle Flynn and make sure no one came looking for us. Thomas and Andrew had fled on foot into the mountains, eventually making their way to a hunting cabin Thomas knew of from previous hiking trips. They had stayed there for days while Andrew recovered from his injuries, then had made their way out of the state using the cash Thomas had withdrawn earlier. We became different people, Thomas explained. I knew too much about Westlake, about the corruption in the county. I knew they'd keep coming for us if they thought we were alive. So we had to die, at least as far as the world was concerned. Thomas and Andrew becoming Philip and James Warren, later Thomas and Jamie Warren, and subsequently adopting other identities, had built new lives in Canada. Andrew had completed his education and now worked in cybersecurity under yet another name, while Thomas had used his engineering expertise in various capacities, always staying below the radar. We checked on Grace when we could, from a distance, Thomas said. It killed me to see her suffering, believing we might be dead, but I truly believed contacting her would put her in danger too. Westlake had powerful friends, even from prison. When asked why he had finally come forward, Thomas explained that the discovery of the license plate fragment and the renewed investigation had convinced him that their carefully constructed facade was crumbling. Rather than wait to be found, he had decided to control the narrative. Andrew, I still call him that in private. He has a life now, a good life, a family. I need to know he will be protected before I say anything more about where he is or what name he's using. Reynolds assured Thomas that witness protection could be arranged, not just for him and Andrew, but for Andrew's family as well. The evidence Thomas had gathered about the Carson River Bridge, combined with his testimony about the events of October 17, 1997, would be crucial in filing additional charges against Howard Westlake and pursuing Michael Donato, who remained at large. 2 days later, Thomas Reeves was reunited with Grace in a secure FBI facility. Their reunion, after 23 years of separation, was both joyous and heartbreaking. You were right, Thomas told her, holding her hands tightly. You always said we were out there somewhere. 1 week after that, under strict security measures, Andrew Reeves, now a husband and father of 2, embraced his mother for the first time since he was 16 years old. The case that had haunted Elkhorn Ridge for more than 2 decades had reached a resolution of sorts, though many questions remained. Michael Donato's whereabouts were unknown, though intelligence suggested he was living under an assumed identity in South America. The exact circumstances of Robert Flynn's death, whether at Donato's hands as Thomas believed, or through some other sequence of events, remained unclear. Most troubling was the extent of the corruption that had led to the attempted murder of a father and son. While Howard Westlake maintained he had never ordered violence against the Reeves family, Evidence suggested the conspiracy had extended beyond him and Flynn, potentially involving other business leaders and politicians who had never been identified or held accountable. For Grace Reeves, however, the most important truth had been confirmed. Her family was alive. The Reeves home, which had stood as a silent monument to loss for 23 years, would once again be filled with voices, with laughter, with life. "Some people think it's strange that I'm not angry," Grace told reporters at a carefully managed press conference. 23 years was stolen from us. I missed seeing my son grow up, build a career, get married, become a father himself. But anger won't give us back those years. All we can do now is make the most of the time we have left. Thomas and Andrew Reeves, along with Andrew's wife and children, entered witness protection with new identities, relocating to an undisclosed location. Grace joined them, leaving behind the town where she had kept vigil for so long. The house on Maple Street was sold, the proceeds donated to an organization supporting families of missing persons. The Andrew Reeves Memorial Scholarship at Elkhorn Ridge High School was renamed the Reeves Family Scholarship, its funding substantially increased by an anonymous donor. And in the mountains above Elkhorn Ridge, where a father and son had fled into the darkness on a warm October night in 1997, a simple marker was placed beside the trail. It bore no names, no dates, just 7 words. "Know all who vanish wish to be found." The crashed Ford Explorer, the pivotal piece of evidence that had launched both the original investigation and its resurrection 23 years later, was finally removed from government storage. It was transported to Quantico, Virginia, where it would be used in FBI training as an example of how overlooked evidence and evolving forensic techniques can breathe new life into cold cases. The green SUV that had plunged into a ravine on a lonely mountain road had become more than the site of an attempted murder. It had become the beginning of a story about survival, about the length to which a father would go to protect his son, and about the endurance of hope in the face of overwhelming odds. As Special Agent Reynolds closed the official file, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a small piece of metal found embedded in a pine tree. The Reeves case would never truly be over, not while Michael Donaveau remained at large, not while questions lingered about the full extent of the conspiracy, but its heart had been resolved. Thomas and Andrew Reeves had vanished in 1997, not as victims but as survivors, choosing disappearance over death. And 23 years later, they had chosen to return, proving that sometimes even the most baffling mysteries can find their way to resolution, in their own time and on their own terms.